It's time for the penultimate heat in my yearly rankings review tournament. So after the rather threadbare year that was 2020, we are back with a bang in 2021 because I have seen 27 movies from this particular year, and today I'm going to be ranking my top 20 of those. So we've got 7 dishonourable mentions. I'll quickly read those out in no particular order. So we've got Spiral from the Book of Saw. We've got Fear Street Part 1. Fear Street Part 2. I didn't even bother with Part 3. Escape Room 2, one of the biggest disappointments of the year for me. Paw Patrol the movie, the only reason I saw that is because I went to see it at the cinema with my son. Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, was it? I went to see this at the cinema as well, albeit on my own this time, and I was wildly disappointed with that movie. The first half was alright, but I was so bored in the second half. And finally, Malignant, and this was a real surprise because normally I really like James Wan, I normally really like Annabelle Wallis, but this film just did not do it for me, I'm sad to say. So those are the dishonourable mentions, but let's get into the main list. Although before we do, the usual disclaimer at this point that the top 2 films today will go through to my forthcoming grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. But for now, let's concentrate on 2021, and we'll start with the film that I have in 20th place. So at number 20 we have the Candyman remake, or was it a sequel? I don't even care. Without checking my notes, I think the original Candyman from 1992 has qualified for my grand final, but I would even say that Candyman 2 Farewell to the Flesh is a more enjoyable film than this one. I went to the cinema to see this and I was pretty underwhelmed, I've got to say. In the first half of the film there's a lot of interesting camera angles and points of view shots and good production design to keep me interested to a certain point, but the second half of the film, the story just goes nowhere, and the ending is a really bad case of sequel baiting. I think they wanted to make more than just this one film, but they couldn't because the box office just wasn't that great, so they've ended it in a really unsatisfying place. I'm not completely against the idea of giving this film another watch if I'm going through the other Candymans, but on the whole this was a pretty disappointing experience. So at number 19 we have The Ice Road, one of Liam Neeson's recent thrillers, and he mixes it up a little bit in this one because he's not playing the usual ex-Special Forces guy, you know, shooting loads of villains. He plays a normal, down-to-earth trucker in this film. He has to make some kind of delivery across all these frozen lakes in Alaska. It's a treacherous journey, and the truck could literally go through the ice at any moment, and there were a number of close shaves throughout this journey for him and his compatriots. It's an exciting film, and there's even a villain at the end of the road who needs taking care of for some BS reason that I can't remember. This is not one of Neeson's best, but it's certainly a long way from being his worst, so if you can catch this on streaming somewhere, I would absolutely devote a couple of hours to it. Those Who Wish Me Dead is at number 18, a film with a slightly odd title. I went to see this at the cinema mainly because I thought I might get an experience similar to a PS4 game I played a few years ago called Firewatch, but sadly things didn't really pan out on that score because Firewatch is more of a psychological thriller. This film is more of an action thriller. You've got a bunch of bad guys chasing Angelina Jolie and her fireman colleagues into the woods, and there are forest fires raging. The actual fire part of this movie is quite well done. The fires really feel like a force of nature in this. They feel really brutal, actually. But the villains versus Jolie side to things is not quite as captivating. It's not a bad film, but I do sort of regret spending a cinema ticket on it and buying a milkshake and, you know, spending a decent amount of my time and money on it. I'd have rather just caught it at home sometime, really. At number 17 we have Don't Breathe 2. I was not one of those people who thought the original Don't Breathe was one of the great horror films of recent years. I mean, it's all right, but nothing special. And to be honest, the only reason why I went to watch this one at the cinema it's just because I wanted something to do. But sitting here right now, I couldn't even tell you which one I prefer out of Don't Breathe 1 and 2. They're both decent, but nothing special, in my opinion. I think one of the biggest issues I have with these films is that I just don't buy that this character could be blind and yet be so competent at taking people down. And, you know, I mean, how would anybody do that if they were blind? I had a similar issue with Matt Murdock in the Daredevil TV series, and didn't Rutger Hauer play a blind assassin once in a movie, and he somehow magically was able to take everybody down. John Wick 4 again had an assassin who was blind, and yet somehow he was the most technically efficient villain in the entire film. It's not that I'm against representation for people with disabilities. I'm all for that, actually. I just don't feel like blind people can be Steven Seagal. I mean, if I shut my eyes right now, the idea that I could get off this settee and take on someone in hand-to-hand combat without swishing at thin air and just making a total hash of it, it's just ridiculous to me, you know. Probably in time I could sharpen my other senses, but not to the point where I would be some mega assassin, you know. It just does not work for me, period. So number 16, we have There's Someone Inside Your House. This is a horror film which I guess tries to capture that Scream vibe. I'm going to open my eyes again now, if that's all right. So we've got a bunch of teens here in some kind of town in the middle of nowhere. It feels like Nebraska, somewhere like that. And there's a killer running around. A few good kills in this. There's also a good sequence in a cornfield that I remember, and the cornfield gets set on fire, something like that. It's not bad. It's on Netflix. If you're the sort of person who has Netflix and likes to dip in and out of the horror list from time to time, then absolutely make this a film to check out. It's not a classic, but it's worth at least one watch. At number 15, we have A Quiet Place Part 2. This is the only film I've ever seen in IMAX, and it might end up being the last film I ever see in IMAX. I completely forgot I was in an IMAX theatre within about 10 minutes of this film starting, so I'm not entirely sure it's worth the extra money. Maybe this was the wrong film for it. I had big hopes for this film because the first one was a really smartly made original film, and I kind of hoped that they would push things on with this second one. I hoped that this would be more of an action horror film. This would be the aliens to the first film's Alien. We'd find out more about the creatures, etc., etc. But it doesn't really do that. In fact, they go for completely the opposite approach. They keep the creatures a mystery again, and they just try and repeat the first film, really, which is fine because the quality of the first film was quite high. But I don't think there are enough standout moments for me in this second film, which is a shame. It kind of feels like you're just watching a couple of episodes of The Last of Us when you're watching this, instead of a truly cinematic experience. I'm still up for watching the next one that they bring out. There's going to be more of these. They make money. And I'll at least say that these films are better than the Don't Breathe films, but I just hope at some point they knock one out of the park with this, because it's got so much potential, and Emily Blunt is always a really good watch. At number 14, we have Ghostbusters Afterlife. I didn't ask for this film, but I've got to begrudgingly admit it's rather good. I think the fact that it's set out in the sticks just gives it a refreshingly different feel from some of those earlier ones. Definitely the worst thing about Ghostbusters 2 was the fact that it felt like a copycat of the first film because of that New York setting. But we've got a good story here, good characters. I like that the old guard come back and do some cameos in this. This definitely gets things back on track for me after that disappointing female-led Ghostbusters film, and I could absolutely watch another one. I believe they are already making a sequel involving these same characters that have been established in Afterlife, so yeah, let's see what they do with that. At number 13, we've got Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City, and I'm very sad that I've had to put this film this low because I'm a big Resident Evil fan, movies and games, but this film, this reboot, it just didn't quite cut the mustard. Hands down, the worst thing about it is the fact that it tries to adapt the Resident Evil 1 and 2 games in the same film. Big mistake. Those two games were not meant to be interwoven into the same narrative. It just does not work at all. If you want to mix Resi 2 and 3 together in the same film, fine, but not 1 and 2. You need to do those two separate. Absolutely. I like the style of this film. This definitely feels closer to the spirit of the games than, say, the Jovovich films, but on the whole, it's a failure, you know? It's not a terrible film. It's an average film. It's not terrible, but certainly it failed at the box office. And you've got to say, the live-action stuff to do with Resident Evil recently has really missed the mark. There was this, and also the Netflix TV show, that completely bombed as well. So even though the games are still going great guns, the live action TV shows and films that they've been doing just haven't been up to par. I really hope the next screen adaptation is a lot better. Can they please just take this series one game at a time? 1 game per film or 1 game per season, please. It's not a difficult concept. Can somebody please try it? So number 12, we have Fast and the Furious 9. This is a middle-of-the-road entry for me. I'd rather watch this one than some of the earlier street racing ones, except for maybe Tokyo Drift. That was really good. But when it comes to latter day Fast and the Furious, number 5 is better than this. 7 is better than this. 8 is better than this. The problem with this one, the biggest problem with this one, is that it's just a bit too comical and silly at times. It definitely jumps the shark in a number of scenes. There's one moment where Dom drives a car off a cliff and somehow lands perfectly on this thing across the other side. It's an impossible jump. It just cannot be done. I wish they'd just keep these films grounded as much as possible. Sometimes they just go too far with some of the stuff that they do. I like the second half of this film better than the first half. I think by that point, I think my brain has just been so beaten into submission. I'm just like, yeah, okay, let's just enjoy this for what it is. So if I gave this another chance, maybe I would enjoy it even more. But if I was to rank these films today, I would fully expect to end up putting this one roughly in the middle. I like what they did with the magnets in this, the giant magnets that knocked vehicles off course. That was really cool. At number 11, we have The Marksman. And oh, look at this, Liam Neeson popping in to see us for the second time today. In this one, he plays some kind of ex-lawman who is retired on an Arizona ranch, but he's got big money problems. One day, he just happens to be driving past the border with Mexico, and he comes across this woman and her son who have just fled from Mexico, and they've got some gangsters tailing them. A big shootout follows, the woman dies, and so the boy ends up in Liam Neeson's care, and they flee. But because one of the gangsters who was killed in this shootout was the brother of a big cartel boss from back in Mexico, the Mexicans want blood, and so a lot of their men go after Neeson and the boy. Neeson, meanwhile, is trying to get the boy to Chicago to get him to his aunt's or something. So we end up with a kind of road movie with this, but towards the end we get some really good car chases and shootouts and things like that. It's a good time. If you have to choose one of them out of this and the Ice Road, then go for this one, but in all honesty, try and watch both because they're both good films. Liam Neeson very rarely completely misses the mark and disappoints. At number 10, we have Halloween Kills, and once again I find myself just riddled with disappointment because Halloween is my favourite horror franchise, and yet here I am putting one of the most recent films only as high as 10th. Tell you the truth, I was loving this film for pretty much the first hour, but I think they really dropped the ball with the climax. I didn't mind all that Evil Dies Tonight stuff. I know that bothered a lot of people. That didn't bother me, not at all. What did bother me was the street fight between Myers and all the locals. I just felt like it was filmed in a really lazy way. And also the climax with Karen, that was so predictable, and I just felt it was wrong to do that after Karen had really got the better of Myers barely 5 minutes earlier. So I definitely wouldn't have taken that route. If only they could have finished this film off really well, because honestly, that first hour, it's got some of the best Halloween stuff I think I've ever seen, but the overall feeling that I get after watching this is just one of dissatisfaction because of that third act. One crumb of comfort is that in the next rankings after this, I will be speaking briefly about Halloween Ends, and I think that film is a better one than this one, so I think Ends will come higher than 10th. At number 9, we have The Forever Purge, aka The Purge 5. I saw this one at the cinema. It was my first time seeing a Purge film at the cinema, and I got exactly what I wanted as a punter, i.e. the siren goes off near the beginning, it's chaos in the streets, people are killing people for seemingly no reason, and what more do you want from a Purge movie? This one has got a slightly more Latino flavour to it than the previous ones, because you've got these Mexican, Spanish characters in this who want to flee to Mexico, and we end up with a big shootout in the hills somewhere. But I had a good time with it. I can't remember a single character or kill from it, but I know I had a really good time. And certainly if I ever review these films, I'll definitely have to pay a bit more attention to the details and the people in the story. So at number 8, we have the Wrong Turn reboot. I am definitely a bigger fan of this franchise than most people. In fact, I am definitely of a mind to review these films at some point. I think I would get a lot out of that. As for this retelling of the whole thing, I think it's very well done. There's a great sense of mystery in the beginning when our new characters go to this strange town and then into the woods, and for the longest time we don't know who or what the villains are in this, because we sort of know that they're not going to be the same as the mountain men from the earlier films. So yeah, it's quite a nice vibe that you get for the longest time in this. And when the horror starts, I mean, there's some really nasty stuff in this. It's quite a bleak tone that they go for here. But what really seals the deal for me in this film is the climax, the final scene specifically. When the credits are coming down, we get one final scene, and it's glorious. I just absolutely love that. Sadly, there probably won't be a sequel. This film did pretty much no business at the box office from what I recall, and there's been no announcement of a follow-up, but hey-ho, maybe 7 films is enough. So number 7, we have The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, aka The Conjuring 3. This film seems to get universally criticised by anybody who chooses to discuss it. I don't get it though, honestly. I went to watch this at the cinema. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 when I did my review. I like that they shake things up with this one. They do something different. They have the Warrens on the road. We see all these different locations this time. Like for example, the Warrens go to the woods at one point. They go to a morgue. They crawl under somebody's house in another scene. There's this whole underground sequence, and we get a real villain in this one, an actual human villain, at least for a time. And once I cottoned on to the fact that we did have a human villain, I found that quite creepy, actually. So on the whole, yeah, I don't understand the loathing for this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm curious to see what people make of the 4th and final film when it comes out, because they're going to make one more. At the moment, it's got a title of The Conjuring Last Rites, I think. One thing I can guarantee, though, is that they will absolutely go back to putting the Warrens in a single location for that 4th film, because I just think that they will try and course correct what they perceive to be mistakes that were made in this film. I could be wrong about that, but that's just a little prediction of mine. But in the meantime, we've got The Nun 2 coming out this October. That's the next Conjuring Universe film, and I imagine the next one after that will be The Conjuring 4. At number 6, we have the James Bond film No Time to Die. I went to watch this at the cinema with my wife and 11-year-old son. None of us had any idea what was going to happen in the third act. We just thought this was going to be a normal James Bond film. And let's just say that what happens at the end of this did not go down well with my wife and son. Me personally, I mean, I didn't like it at the time that I watched it, but because I've been a Bond fan for a long, long time, I was less opposed to getting something different, something new, you know. I mean, I still found myself welling up inside at the end of this film, but my wife and son saw it very differently. They felt like a golden cinematic rule had very much been broken with what they did with this. Now, since this film came out, I've watched it a second time on my own, and I still found myself getting emotional towards the end of it. It's a series that's very dear to my heart, you know, and what they've done at the end of this film, it gets to me whenever I watch it, I've got to admit. But I think in time this film will get more popular than it is now. I think it'll be a similar sort of deal to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, stuttering a bit there. But I think it is going to need time, and I think we'll have to get some other Bond films to come out before people do go back and reevaluate No Time to Die. I hope they get on with casting a new Bond soon, because it already feels like a long time since No Time to Die. It's a bit depressing, actually, how long they take to make James Bond films these days. I mean, it's got to the point where it's like a once in 5-year event or something. They need to go back to making it once in every 3 years or something like that. At number 5, we have Black Widow. This is another one I saw at the cinema with my son. It was just me and him on this occasion. I wouldn't say I was massively looking forward to this one. I kind of felt at the time like they'd left it too late for a Black Widow solo film, and I didn't entirely like the fact that it was a prequel, but I guess they had to do it that way once they killed the character off in Endgame. But to my surprise, this was pretty damn awesome, actually. I really liked the prologue that showed you a bit of history about Black Widow, and the soundtrack's really good, especially the song that plays at the beginning. I love that. And the new character played by Florence Pugh, she's really good. I liked the look of this film, the snowy settings, the new costumes that they used. Taskmaster's really good. The whole villain's lair in the sky, I loved that as well. So yeah, we came out of the cinema after watching this, and I've got to say, right now, I'd say this is one of my favourite Marvel films. Not that a lot of people would see it that way. It's also the most recent Marvel film I've seen. I think they've probably released like another 7 or 8 films since Black Widow, and I've not seen those yet. The thing is, the one after this, I think it's the Eternals, and I've just never been bothered to watch the Eternals. The trailer for that just didn't get me interested, so I'm stuck in the mud on Marvel at the moment. I know that the Eternals is the next one I need to see, but I just can't be bothered to watch it. So at number 4, we have a film called Oxygen. It's a sci-fi film set in space. It's fairly low budget, I think. It's about this woman who gets put into a kind of cryostasis tube. Her and a bunch of other people are being taken to a distant planet to survey it and looking to possibly colonize it. But on this very long journey, all these characters are meant to be asleep, but this one woman, I think she wakes up halfway there or something because of a malfunction, and now she can't go back under again, so she's running out of oxygen in this tube. She's not meant to be awake, breathing the air, if you see what I mean. So she's got to figure out a way to survive, and I guess it doesn't sound like much, this film. You're probably thinking right now, okay, so this entire film is in like a little tube. A lot of it is, but not all of it. There are some really good twists that happen in the second half. I thoroughly enjoyed it, honestly. If you like sci-fi films set in space, then absolutely give it a chance. I think it's a Netflix film, although I don't know if Netflix own it themselves or whether they just have the rights to be showing it at the moment. I'm not sure on that. So at number 3, we have Army of the Dead, and I guess this is today's unlucky film, which doesn't quite make it to the grand final. This was directed by Zack Snyder. It's loosely a follow-up to his 2004 Dawn of the Dead remake. Not that there are any characters in the first film who pop up in this one. They're mostly just connected by the fact that they have Of the Dead on the end of their name, I guess. So this time around, we are in Las Vegas. We've got a group of mercenaries who want to get to the Strip because they found out about this huge amount of money which is just lying idle in a vault in a casino. But the trouble is, the Strip and all the casinos, they're absolutely packed full of zombies, so this is going to be no easy mission. This film is just full of great action. The dialogue's pretty sharp as well. It's a very long horror film. It's like 2 hours, 20 minutes, but you get some amazing scenes and scenarios in this, and a killer ending, a really clever ending that absolutely sets up another film, and I believe we are getting another film at some point. So yeah, Army of the Dead is pretty spectacular. If I was going to make a list of my favourite zombie films of all time, I definitely think that this one would be included in such a conversation. But for now, let's move swiftly on and find out which 2 films are going through to the grand final, starting with this film in second spot. So number 2, we have Dune. Now I will quickly say that coming into this, I'd never read any of the Dune novels. I'd never seen the David Lynch film. I was a complete newbie to all things Dune when I sat down to watch this, and I just really loved it. I just love the visuals in this. This sandy planet just looks absolutely awesome. Terrifying, don't get me wrong, but awesome. The giant worms, I mean, they are something else in this. Are they worms? Sandworms, giant sandworms, right? But the film doesn't focus too much on those, which is a smart move, because otherwise this film would just seem like a big budget Tremors. There's lots going on in this film, lots of politics and subplots and characters with various agendas and things. And I really liked it, and I like the soundtrack as well. There's a really kind of throbbing, pulsing sort of tune that you get that plays a lot throughout this. I think the fighting techniques that the people have in this world are quite interesting. So yeah, consider me a fan of this now, and I would like to check out that David Lynch film at some point. I'm certainly looking forward to watching Dune 2 when that comes out. So there we have it. Right, let's crack on and find out what is my favourite film from 2021. Yep, at number 1 I have The Night House, one of the most criminally underrated horror films from the past few years. It is what you would call an elevated horror film, so if you're not into that sort of thing, then don't pay your money on the door, but honestly, this is phenomenal. I saw it at the cinema when it came out, and I also did a review for it on this channel. At the time I gave it 4.5 out of 5, but I hadn't properly digested it at that point. I've since seen the movie twice more on Disney, and for me now it's a 5 out of 5 movie. It's an absolute masterpiece. There are some genuinely scary scenes in this. The story is something else. I don't think I've ever seen a film before where you can literally interpret the film in 3 different ways. It's really cool. I've had my 3rd viewing, and I still feel like I'm discovering new things about this film, new ways of looking at the events that happen in the story and stuff. There's a brilliant central performance from, I think her name's Rebecca Hall. She's really, really good. I've got a funny story about my cinema trip on this. I think I mentioned this in my review as well. So when I went on my own, and next to me was this guy, and just beyond him, his girlfriend. Now, this guy was a pretty heavy-set guy. He didn't look like the sort of dude who would scare easily at a horror film, but when the scares came in this film, he was all over the place, limbs and arms and legs just going everywhere. It amused me no end, but to be fair, it is a genuinely unsettling movie in many ways, so check it out if you've not seen it. The only sad thing about The Night House at the moment is that there's no physical release in Region B, so I can't actually put this on my shelf, which is a shame because I'd love to do that. I'm sort of relying at the moment on this film staying on the catalogue of the Disney Channel because it's starting to become a once-a-year watch for me, this. Really cool film anyway. So, okay, so we've got The Night House and Dune going through to the grand final. I will quickly read out to you the names of some films from 2021 that I've not seen that I'd like to. So we've got The Green Knight, The Suicide Squad, Cry Macho, The Last Duel, Paranormal Activity 7, The Eternals. Okay, I've put that down, not because I want to see it, but because I'm trying to G myself up to watch it so I can get on with the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I've also got written down here Spider-Man No Way Home, but that's kind of an extension of the Eternals, you know. Once I watch the Eternals, the Spider-Man No Way Home film will probably eventually take care of itself, if you see what I mean. Right, we'll leave it there for today. I have got one more heat left to do before we get to the grand final. That will be the 2022 rankings. So until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.